Hey, here to talk with you guys today about one of the biggest inspirations for the GODFOE Universe that Daniel Evans and I have created, which the comic books for that are going to be published by Legacy Comics. So we're excited about that partnership as well. I've mentioned before in other places that one of the biggest inspirations for myself and for Dan as well is the book Akira. And Akira, it exists as both a Japanese comic book or manga and also as a animated film. And I love both versions of the story. They're both very different, but I love both versions of the story. But in particular, the manga of Akira is not only is it a seminal piece of work, but it had a huge impact on artistically, but even more deep than that, on the type of story we're telling, especially in Apollyon 20Xx. So if you watch the film version of Akira, what you'll see is a lot of cyberpunk imagery, lots of neon lights and things like that. The film version is heavily influenced by Ridley Scott's Blade Runner, which is another work that we love. But the story in the manga, it began being published in a magazine in Japan in '82, same year that Blade Runner, the film, came out. And so, where the film Blade Runner had a visual impact on the animated version of Akira, the biggest impact on the book itself, I think, on the imagery that you see in the manga and on the storytelling, is Japan still dealing with the fact that atomic bombs had been dropped on two of their major cities during World War II. When you look at a lot of the media from out of Japan, a lot of the things like Godzilla, who is almost a personification of an atomic bomb in the form of a monster. That event was essentially, when you look at what Japan faced, Japan experienced an apocalyptic event, and in the wake of that, their entire culture had to change. Those bombs, they essentially reset Japan. Like they had this generation that grew up in the shadow of the mushroom clouds. They grew up with a different Japan than the one that belonged to their parents. And so when you get 30, 40 years removed from that event, and you have creators making art that reflects the lasting impact of having your society being built in the shadow of basically an apocalypse. And it's a huge part of Japanese storytelling, and it's a very, very big part of the Akira manga. When you look at the book, so much of the imagery is ruins, it's explosions, it's fallout type imagery. It's completely inescapable. And when you look at the characters of Akira, they're young characters who are growing up in what's called Neo Tokyo, because the Tokyo of the past has been destroyed by another apocalyptic event, which in the story is a child called Akira who had psychic abilities that the government had manipulated, and in the process of that created a being that they couldn't control, and it ended up destroying Tokyo. And these kids are living in the world that had to rebuild after that. There's another strong theme, and it's reflected in the animated film, but it's much more explicit and much more present in the manga, is that the children, and I say children, I mean teenagers, the teenagers that are the main focus of the story have a fascination with pills. There's a lot of drugs. There's a lot of pill popping in the manga, and it is a part of the movie, but it's much more evident in the book. And it's this idea of these young people trying to cope with a world that's changing in a way that they don't understand. And when I think about our story, what we're trying to tell, there's a lot of things that I pull from Akira, and that Dan and I have pulled from Akira. Not that we're copying that, but there's a lot of influence that I think you'll see in the way we're telling our story. Apollyon 20Xx is essentially the build up to what would be an apocalyptic event, not just for one country, but for the world. It is this idea of a group of very powerful people with the desire to manipulate the population. And what they're doing is essentially trying to create their own god that they can use and control. And in doing that, they create something that is out of their control. And so, when we watch the story unfold in Apollyon 20Xx, and then especially in the books coming after that, what we're going to see is young people who are trying to understand and deal with the impact of the end of the world and the rebuilding of a new one. And that theme runs throughout all of the different eras in the GODFOE Universe story. And there will be eras in that story that are dealing with the fallout of Armageddons that they don't even remember, that nobody alive remembers, but the impact is still seen, the impact is still felt, and that's a through line that will carry on in each of these different series, whether it's the novels, whether it's the graphic novels and the comics, the podcasts. They're all going to be showing this world that has again and again and again faced apocalypse level events and had to rebuild. And in the background of all that is this being who, for all intents and purposes, is a deity, but is not truly a god. It's a human being who has transcended reality and become more than a person. Another thing that we've pulled from this, and I hope it's something that people will respond to, is I'm 38, September I'll be 39, so I'm closing in on my 40s, and in my lifetime I've seen, and I know all of you have seen, this dramatic shift that has taken place in the world. And we don't live in the same world that we used to, and social media and the political landscape have all so drastically shaped and reshaped the world that we live in now. And I know that there have been a lot of things that built up to that but if you really look at our generation, our Hiroshima and Nagasaki was 9/11. 9/11 showed, at least here in America, showed us that we have an illusion of safety that can be taken away from us. 9/11 showed us, it was, conspiracy theories, of course, have existed for a long, long time, but 9/11 jump-started this enormous distrust in our leaders and in the people who are supposed to be protecting us, the people who are supposed to know what to do to keep these events from happening. And that was, if I remember watching those news reports as I remember watching in my college classroom on a little old school TV on the cart, watching the second plane hit the buildings, and it felt like the end of the world. And everything changed after that. And then we got and regardless of whether you land on your conservative, your liberal, Democrat, Republican, whatever, I think we can all look at the past 10, 15, 20 years, and the political landscape has become such a mud-slinging, just knock down, drag out, no honor, no truth. And we've watched the world slip into this manipulative state where you don't know who you can trust. And anything that you hear, anything that you read, anything that you see online, it's all suspect. And truth becomes something hard to find. And it's almost impossible to watch a movie, read a book, play a video game, pick up a comic book, listen to any podcast, or get on the news, turn on the news, or any kind of any signal that we receive, we have to view as suspect, because there's always a manipulation behind it. And we're taking that, you can call it paranoia, whatever you want to call it, but that sense of I can't trust what I'm told, and we're amping that up. Because what we want you to see with Apollyon 20Xx is, imagine that the most powerful people in the world, people who do not have your best interest at heart, people who are greedy, people who control the wealth, people who control the narrative, imagine that they were able to take their will and intentions and weaponize their intentions. Imagine that with a signal, they can manipulate your very thoughts and impose their will without you even knowing it. Imagine that the people in the dark, the shadow government, if you want to call it that, the elite, whatever you want to call them. In our book, we call them the Order. They've been around for a long time. But imagine if these people had the power that they could send a signal out, and every human being that is connected to a device, every person that's using Wi-Fi, everybody that's in the atmosphere of Wi-Fi, anybody within touching distance of that signal, they could implant thoughts, decisions into your head. I mean, we already live in a world where you can get canceled at any moment. All it takes is a viral video or a Twitter post to get you canceled, and it goes all the way through the world, like almost instantaneously. But imagine that not only could they say, hey, we hate this person now and we're shutting them down, they're all of their assets are removed, but imagine that they could just with a single signal just turn off empathy in the entire population and say, hey, this particular subset of people need to go. And you'd obey without even knowing where that signal came from. You'd think it was your idea. That's the story we're telling. Akira dealt with so many things about post-humanism and this idea of Tetsuo as a character becoming more than just a normal human being, and the first thing he wants to do is set himself up as an emperor. Imagine the destruction that would happen if evil people had all the power. And that's the story we're telling. That's the apocalypse that we're building to in Apollyon 20Xx, and that sets the stage for everything that comes back after that, everything in the Biophile Kolga, everything that happens in the the rest of the GODFOE universe is all a result of the world-changing cataclysm that Apollyon 20Xx is building to.